All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the acknowledgments. So today we're going to be talking about England in the Tudor period, right? So the Tudor Dynasty ruled England for slightly over a century. Right, so from 1485, when Henry VII deposes Richard III, to 1603, when Elizabeth I dies without an heir. Right, so the first king of this dynasty is Henry VII, and Henry is not a very interesting king. He's kind of his reputation historically is as kind of a really effective bureaucrat. So when he comes to the throne in 1485, we remember what kind of state is England in?
Like everyone's fighting. War of Roses?
Yeah, so we're at the very end of the War of the Roses, right? So we're at the end of a prolonged period of civil war. There's a great deal of unrest. A lot of the old noble families are either killed off or living in exile in Europe, right? Because they are out of favor with the new regime. They backed the wrong horse. So the character of England in this period fundamentally changes, right? We start moving from this kind of old feudal aristocracy where there are knights riding around on horseback and knocking each other off of horses. Right, we saw some evidence of this with the Morte d'Arthur, right, where Arthur essentially kills Mordred using a peasant weapon at the very end, and gives up the sword, the symbol of authority, throws it back into the earth. Right, things are changing. Things are not as they used to be. The old aristocratic order is kind of breaking down. So Henry and his successors, to fill the ranks of the aristocracy, right? They start giving these old domains away to wealthy commoners who supported them, right? As a sort of reward. It's like, okay, so your family provided us with money or ships or horses or whatever the hell else we needed, right? So we will reward you with a knighthood. Congratulations, good for you. Your family is ennobled. Now, we saw some evidence of this even in earlier periods, right? We saw the way Geoffrey Chaucer's family moved into the lower nobility, for example, in a single generation. So what we have coming in here is the sort of the wife of Bath and her people, her type of people, sort of coming into power. Yeah, Will.
Is that what started the tradition of giving honorary knighthood? Did it start all the way back then?
Yeah,
this
well,
day and age, like celebrities get it and all
well,
that kind of stuff.
yeah, here's another thing. Actually, like by the end of the 15th century, there's a particular invention that has come to Europe that has made knighthood pretty much obsolete. Anybody know what it is? What's the original purpose of making somebody a knight?
Fight for it.
Yeah, they're going to fight for you, right? So you give them enough land that they can afford to buy a suit of armor and a horse, and that they can afford to raise a levy of peasant troops, right? And then they'll, contribute to your army. So the traditional knight, right, is a guy on horseback wearing a great big suit of metal armor. But metal armor, by the 16th century, was pretty much obsolete. Why? Pardon? Yeah, gunpowder had made its way from China into Europe, slowly. And yeah, gunpowder weapons, cannons, very inaccurate muskets, primitive bombs called petards were now quite common. So the old machinery of war, city walls, swords, lances, metal armor, these things were all becoming obsolete. So you didn't really need for knights as a military force anymore, right?
So after this period, I remember talking to you about the, what was it, college? I don't know what it was. It was like college of, I can't remember what it was, but basically they gave the coat of arms to people nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
England has their whole system set up.
Mm-hmm.
Did they just kind of forget about their coat of arms for a while and just go to war?
No, but it becomes, it no longer has a military purpose, right? The original purpose of a coat of arms is because, you're riding around in full armor, your face mask is down, unless you have some sort of symbol painted on your shield or on your flag or your armor or whatever, people aren't going to be able to recognize you. They can't tell who you are. If there's no reason for you to be riding around in metal armor anymore, then your coat of arms no longer serves any sort of military purpose. So it becomes purely a kind of social thing. And like the trappings of knighthood don't disappear, but they become a kind of aristocratic game. Right? People still host tournaments through this period. People still make elaborate suits of metal armor, but like they become so elaborate that they're no longer practical for fighting. Right? They're not for actual warfare anymore, they're just for display. And the Tudors, after Henry VII, are a very, very showy dynasty. They're very much about display and about showing off and about demonstrating their wealth and power. Now, Henry VII's more famous successor, you're more likely to at least have some sort of image of in your mind, Henry VIII. When you think of Henry VIII, what sort of image is conjured up for you? A big old fat guy with a lot of wives, right? And really, the last 15 years of his life dominate the public imagination, right? When he divorced his wife, broke away from the Catholic Church, and became immensely fat. All within this sort of, period of decline at the end of his reign, right? For much of his reign, Henry actually looked more like this, right? This is Henry at about age 40. He died at the age of 55. So as a younger man, he was very tall. He was over 6 feet, very broad-shouldered, very burly, very strong, highly intelligent, talented in a number of realms, and extremely charismatic. Right? He was also regarded, particularly as a younger man, as very good-looking. This is the Henry we're more familiar with, right? Big, fat, and a little bit crazy.
There was a recent study that come out. I just read about it a couple of days ago, talking about they think obviously he took a hit from the head during one of the jousting tournaments.
Oh yeah. This is actually fairly common historical knowledge. The reason he got so fat as an older man was because in 1536, at which point he was about 45 years old, he was injured in a tournament. Actually, it wasn't a blow to the head. Actually, it was a blow to the leg, and as a result, couldn't get around unassisted anymore. So that, combined with his preference for a very kind of self-indulgent lifestyle, led to putting on a hell of a lot of weight, right? All of that muscle he built up as a very active young man turned into fat. Right? So, let this be a lesson to you, remain active, right? Don't just sit on your asses all the time. There, but for the grace of God, go we all. So, a lot of his behavior also may have been the result of untreated type 2 diabetes. Right? It can, diabetes left untreated can actually affect your brain. So, Henry, let's go back to younger Henry. It's more relevant for most of this discussion. Henry was never supposed to be king. He was the second son. Does anybody remember from last time what the name of the elder son of Henry VII was? Yeah. Henry VIII had an older brother, Arthur, who should have been King Arthur the First of England, right? So the Tudors were very consciously trying to write themselves into the myth of King Arthur's return. Right? See, we've got an Arthur here in our family. We made this fancy round table. We host these tournaments in which, knights dress up like members of King Arthur's court, right? We're the second coming of, they also used to sort of play up their roots in Wales in the west of England, right? Wales was sort of where was the origin point for most of the King Arthur stories, and was regarded, as it turns out historically falsely, as more British or more Celtic than the rest of Britain, so more sort of authentically native. So after all of these French kings came in and ruined things for a while, right? We're getting an authentically Celtic dynasty again. That's the message they're trying to promote. But Arthur was a relatively uninspiring individual, physically sickly, weak from birth, and probably also slightly mentally incapacitated. He seems to have been developmentally delayed on top of everything else. So it seems like he could not live up to the weight of the name. And he died while still a minor. Henry was everything Arthur was not, right? Henry was very smart, Henry was handsome and athletic, Henry was very popular, and Henry had also received an excellent education. Now, the vogue in Renaissance education was what was called humanism. Have any of you ever heard this term before? Does anybody know what humanism is, or basically what that means? How many of you have ever heard the term Renaissance man? Okay, a couple of you. So what does that mean?
A person who's good at everything.
Yeah, a person who is able to excel in a number of different fields, right? A well-rounded individual. And that was what a humanist education strived to create. Right? Someone who was skilled in a variety of different areas. The basic tenet of humanism was that human potential was basically limitless. And if you had the right sort of education, if you were exposed to the right sort of texts, the right sort of influences in your youth, then you would be able to realize this potential, right? Older theories of education had largely been based on deference to authority, right? Everybody just annotates Aristotle endlessly and endlessly and endlessly. Humanism was more about trying to harness the creative potential of the human being. Humanism is actually the basis for modern liberal arts education, right? This is it's because of the humanists that you have to take, distribution requirements. So if you are pissed about having to take a class like this, even though it's not in your major, right, blame a humanist. So Henry was fluent in French and Latin. He studied philosophy, he studied theology, he studied law, he studied music, what was then known of natural science, and he became a great patron of artists and of writers before his decline started. In fact, the piece of music that I played for you at the beginning of class was composed by Henry. It's called Pastime in Good Company. Now, Henry was for much of his life vexed by the fact that he was unable to father a son who lived past infancy, at least within legitimate marriage. He did have one illegitimate son who survived to adulthood, but an illegitimate son couldn't inherit the throne. So his first marriage is to a Spanish princess by the name of Catherine of Aragon. There was a slight complication here in that Catherine had originally been married to Henry's brother Arthur in order to cement an alliance with Spain. Now, Henry and Catherine actually remained married for about 20 years. But as Catherine was getting sort of beyond her childbearing years and could not father a son who would live more than a few weeks, Henry got very, very nervous about succession, right? They did have a daughter, Mary. More on her in a moment. But Henry became convinced that marriage to his dead brother's widow was sinful, and that God was punishing him for having committed this act. At the very least, this was what he tried to convince the Pope of, in order to get an annulment so that he could marry someone else. He already had his eye on somebody else, a young noblewoman by the name of Anne Boleyn. Pope says no. Henry says, well, to hell with you. I'm the Pope in England now. And declares, he declares himself head of the Church of England. And the Pope says, well, you're excommunicated then. Henry says, fine, I don't want to be part of your church anyway. And seizes all of the church lands in England for the crown. Now, Henry's brand of Protestantism wasn't really any different in form or ritual from Catholicism. Theologically, it's exactly the same. In terms of ritual, it's exactly the same. Essentially, it's just the king puts himself in place of the Pope. He appoints all the bishops, and the bishops appoint all the priests, that sort of thing, right? The guy in charge is different. So, Anne Boleyn also fails to give him a son, gives him a daughter instead, Elizabeth, and within about 2 years, this whole thing has sort of run its course, and Henry is ready to move on. Anne Boleyn has also made herself unpopular with the people. She is very intensely Protestant, and some of the reforms that she promotes aren't popular. So, she is accused of treason, tried and convicted, and off with her head. Yes?
Wasn't she accused of trying to get like her brother to impregnate her?
Yeah, that was one of the things she was accused of, was incest. Now, some of this is political too, right? The Boleyns are one of these newly ennobled families, right? They're sort of like the equivalent of like what we call today like nouveau riche, right? They're not old money. They're not old aristocracy. And so there's a lot of whispering against them anyway. And this is actually one thing to note, that through this period, most of the old families, the old aristocracy, remained Catholic in form and belief, if not in actual practice, while the new aristocrats tended to be more sympathetic to Protestantism. So the Boleyns were part of that newer group. So Henry then marries one Jane Seymour, not the actress who starred in Dr. Quinn Medicine. Are you guys even old enough to remember Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman? Probably not. It was super popular with people my mother's age when I was in high school. Now, Jane does give him a son, Edward, but dies shortly thereafter. And 3 more marriages will proceed, right? Anne of Cleves, who Henry marries by proxy, and then when she's brought to his court for the first time, he sees her, doesn't like her, and immediately annuls the marriage. Catherine Howard, a 17-year-old girl whom the then 45-year-old Henry becomes smitten with, marries, and then when she has an affair with a courtier, has her tried and executed for treason. And his last wife, Catherine Parr, who at least manages to outlive him. So out of 6 wives, only 2 die violently, right? That's only a third. That's not a terrible ratio, right? Yeah, it's still pretty terrible. Okay, so Henry dies, and Edward becomes king. Edward is a lot more Protestant than his father, and is also a child when his father dies. So the realm is largely in the hands of ministers and regents, who are very, very Protestant, mostly members of these new families that his father and grandfather had ennobled. So these guys put in place a lot of reforms. And then Edward, who has never been healthy, dies as a young adult. He doesn't actually reign for very long. And his sister, Mary, being his senior surviving relative, takes the throne. Now, Mary is a little bit paranoid. For one thing, she and Elizabeth, because of the way their mother's relationships with their father ended, had both been declared illegitimate by their father. So the succession is disputed anyway. Mary is also very, very, very staunchly Catholic and tries to return England into the Catholic fold forcefully. Those who resist often find themselves imprisoned, sometimes burned at the stake if they refuse to recant. This does not make her very popular. She is not a very well-remembered monarch. In fact, like the nickname by which history remembers her is Bloody Mary. Even though compared to other monarchs, the number of executions she actually ordered is relatively small, but that's partly because she didn't reign for very long. Now, she also made an unpopular marriage to Philip II, the Catholic King of Spain. Spain was an enemy nation. Spain was Catholic, England was Protestant. This made her subjects, and particularly a lot of the newer nobles, really suspicious of her. Mary was paranoid throughout her life that her Protestant sister Elizabeth was going to rally the new aristocracy, the new Protestant aristocracy, against her in a rebellion. One feature of Tudor family life is extreme paranoia. They're all very, very paranoid. Mary does eventually die without an heir. And Elizabeth, who has been imprisoned for much of her adult life by her sister, is finally released and takes the throne. And so that's who we're dealing with today. Now, in these letters and speeches, Elizabeth, in these letters and speeches, what sort of person comes through to you? Did you notice any particular points or themes she seems to emphasize?
Well, one thing I noticed that was kind of different is she didn't really refer to herself really as a queen or princess with some of the things. Sometimes it was princely or kingly or... Yeah, she plays with gendered language a lot, right? She's talking a princely, kingly... Yeah, we don't see her refer to herself as a queen. Female monarchs reigning in England
alone, right, without a king, would still have been a relative, this is a relatively new thing when Elizabeth takes it. She's only the second, right? Her sister Mary is the first reigning queen of England. So it's not all that surprising that she often uses masculine language to refer to herself, right? But is the way she talks about herself exclusively masculine?
No. She calls herself a mother.
Yeah. She occasionally refers to herself as, the mother of her people, right? What else? If we look at the speech to the troops at Tilbury, for example, right? This is one of her most famous orations, page 762. My loving people, I have been persuaded by some that are careful of my safety to take heed how I committed myself to armed multitudes for fear of treachery. But I tell you that I would not desire to live to distrust my faithful and loving people. Let tyrants fear. I have so behaved myself that under God I have placed my chiefest strength and safeguard in the loyal hearts and goodwill of my subjects. So how is she framing her relationship to her subjects here? Right, essentially she's giving this speech to a mass of armed men on a beach. She's coming among them unarmed. Yeah, it's a relationship of trust, right? So I have done my best for you, and I trust that you are loyal to me. Right? I fear no treachery from you, even though you are all armed and able to harm me at this time. Right? Wherefore I am come among you at this time, but for my recreation and pleasure, being resolved in the midst and heat of the battle to live and die amongst you all, to lay down for my God and for my kingdom and for my people mine honor and my blood even in the dust. I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too. So, what two ideas is she playing off of each other here?
Even though she's a woman, she's still strong. She's just trying to reassure them.
Yeah. Right, I may not be physically imposing and fit for battle, but I have the courage of a king, right? So what stereotype is she playing into here about gender roles? And this is a stereotype that has, carried sort of through time. So it's only relatively recently, right, that in the U.S. Army, women can have a combat role, right? What's that?
She's trying to show that men and women.
Is she actually trying to show that men and women can be equal? She's talking to a force of men here, right? Armed men, ready to go out and do battle.
She knows that that's what they're thinking. So she
Uh-huh.
needs to disprove them of it and tell them but I'm still strong.
Yeah, she does know that this is what they're thinking, right? Physically, anyway, she's a weak and feeble woman, and at this point, she's also, she's no longer young. 1588, she would have been about 55 years old. And 55 years old, her father died at the age of 55. 55 is, for a 16th century person, fairly old, even though she would actually reign for another 15 years after this.
So she's kind of telling your troops that I'm here for you, even though I can't go out and fight with you side by side.
Yeah, she is acknowledging that it would be unseemly for her to actually go out and fight, right? She has the body of but a weak and feeble woman. So she is playing on their expectations and their own gender stereotypes, right? Right. She says, I am a weak and feeble woman, because she knows that's what they think. She's confirming their opinion. But while she may physically be a weak and feeble woman, she is also invested with not only the authority of a king, but also the stomach of a king, like the courage of a king. So what she's doing here, and she does this fairly frequently, is that she is employing the analogy of the two bodies of the king. Right? The king, according to early modern rulership theory, has a physical body as a human being, but is also sort of further embodied as the nation. Right? So you're the king, or in this case the queen. You have your own physical body, that's you, but you are also the embodiment of your country, sort of the personification of your country. So in addition to being Elizabeth Tudor, weak and feeble woman, she is also England, right? Not just the monarch of England, England. And she may be weak, but England is strong. Do you see how this works? Do you see what she's doing? Do we see her playing the same game elsewhere in these speeches? Where else do we see this kind of gendered language?
Golden speech.
Okay, yeah, take us there.
It's shall I ascribe anything to myself and my sex of weakness?
Uh-huh.
And she was talking about how some have seen her as like, maybe some have seen it as a weakness, but she believes it to be like a tribute because she has cared more for
Right.
others, unlike the men who have been more about, I guess, war and stuff. She was more about care, like inside of their country, and I came to their people.
Yeah, and some of what she's doing here is trying to quell popular anger about special favors that she was giving to certain aristocrats that she particularly favored, right? She could give people what were called letters of patent that would give them the exclusive right to some particular form of commerce, right?
So they would be the only one to supply either a certain brand of something?
Yeah, they'd be the like the only person allowed to export wool, or the only person allowed to import wine from Italy, or something like that, right?
So kind of like purveyor to a court.
Yeah. Essentially, what she does is grant them a monopoly on something. And so the House of the Parliament has come to her with an objection to this. Like, look, this is actually doing economic damage. And some of these people are abusing these letters of patent to do something about this. So, shall I ascribe anything to myself and my sexly weakness? I were not worthy to live then, and of all most unworthy of the mercies I have had from God, with ever yet given me a heart which yet never feared any foreign or home enemy. Right. So again, she said, like, I am a weak woman, but I fear no foreign enemy. Right. I am England, and England is strong, and England is secure. Now, this also, this is a rhetorical device she uses a lot, but it actually sort of plays against a certain historical tendency of Elizabeth's, right? She tends to speak as very strong and decisive, but like most of her Tudor relatives, she was actually extremely paranoid. And was often indecisive. Right? She had a lot of her father's strengths. They were very much like each other in a lot of ways. They were both exceptionally well educated, extremely intelligent, and very flirtatious. However, when Henry resolved upon a course of action, he took it. And if anyone got in his way, he removed them from his path. Elizabeth had a tendency to dither over decisions and to try to put things into the hands of her ministers and regents. Now, one thing that they did share in common, another thing that she and her father had in common, they both loved display. And if you go to any place in England, just about any town in England, you will find signs that say Queen Elizabeth slept here. Because she did. I mean, she did these things, they were called progresses, where she and her entire massive entourage would just sort of descend upon some poor hapless noble's manor and stay there and expect to be entertained in sumptuous manner for, perhaps weeks at a time. And on the one hand, this was a great honor for the noble so visited. I get to entertain the queen, but it also tended to bankrupt people. But it was all about sort of display of royal power, right? Display of royal magnificence. And you will find in a lot of the literature of this period a lot of talk of of a glimmering, bejeweled queen, right? This was how she tried to appear to her subjects, in sumptuous gowns covered with jewels, even when she died around the age of 70. Right? Never appeared in public with, except dressed to the nines. So, to get back to her paranoia, right? Elizabeth and the Tudor family in general are very much embroiled in this battle between, right, Protestant and Catholic, between the New England coming into being, right, a new modern England, and an older, more feudal England. One of Elizabeth's closest relatives was Mary Stuart, the Queen of Scotland. Right, Mary, Queen of Scots. How many of you are familiar with the Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? Nursery rhyme? Yeah, it's originally about Mary, Queen of Scots. Right, Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Mary, Mary, can't make up your mind. Now, Mary actually spent about the last 15 years of her life in hiding in England, being shuttled around really sort of from prison to prison by Elizabeth. Because Mary was very, very Catholic. And several of the old Catholic nobles actually did plot to depose Elizabeth and put Mary Stuart on the throne. So in 1587, there was a plot uncovered. It was called the Babington Plot, which involved a few of these old Catholic nobles, a couple of Jesuit priests, and Mary herself. The plot was uncovered, and Elizabeth had to order Mary's execution. She had her tried and executed for treason, which actually Mary wasn't really capable of committing because she wasn't an English citizen, right? She was the Queen of Scotland, which was a different country, and you can't commit treason against a country you're not a citizen of. But, it's good to be the queen, right? So this was something that Elizabeth had a lot of problems with on a lot of levels. One, executing another monarch set a bad precedent, right? The way Mary goes, any of us could go. It made her really, really worried about her own status and the strength of her own reign. And it also provoked war with Spain. Right? Spain was a Catholic country, Mary was a Catholic queen, and the Spanish were kind of just itching for a reason to invade England. So if we look at the way Elizabeth frames the death of Mary on page 760, right? She writes this letter to King James VI of Scotland after having had his mother executed. my dear brother, one thing you'll often find in letters between members of different noble families, they will often refer to themselves as brother or sister. Does anybody know why this is? Most of them actually were pretty closely related. Right? You know, inbreeding was rampant. If you want to look at like the actual effects of inbreeding on aristocratic lines, just look up the history of a guy, Charles II of Spain. It's a pretty extreme example, but it's, you know, kind of amazing that, you know, someone who was cursed with this many recessive genes was actually allowed to rule a country. Anyhow, so yeah, aristocrats across Europe often, you know, they really sort of constituted a separate nationality. They were more closely related to each other usually than they were to their subjects. She says, my dear brother, I would you knew, though not felt, the extreme dolour that overwhelms my mind for that miserable accident, which far contrary to my meaning hath befallen. So what that she refers to his mother's death here as an accident. There's nothing accidental about having someone beheaded, right? Which far contrary to my meaning hath befallen. I have now sent this kinsman of mine, whom ere now it hath pleased you to favour, to instruct you truly of that which is too irksome for my pen to tell you. I beseech you that, as God and many more know, how innocent I am in this case. So you will believe me that if I had bid aught, I would have bid by it. I am not so base-minded that fear of any living creature or prince should make me afraid to do that were just, or done to deny the same. So what does it sound like she's really trying to do here in this letter?
Say it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, she seems to be trying to absolve herself of any blame or guilt over Mary's death, right?
She also seemed like she's saying, I'm still not afraid. Because
Yeah.
when I read through this part,
Uh-huh.
I didn't necessarily get what she meant, but I caught that second half she was saying she's not
Mhm.
afraid of being prince.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, well, that's kind of a little, not necessarily boasting, but, you know, she's saying, well, wasn't my fault, oh well.
Yeah. I mean, what was the reason for Mary's execution? Yeah, plotted to depose her, right?
Is that
So-
something she had to?
Yeah. She's boxed in, right? So the reason she executed Mary is because Mary really was involved in a plot against her. But here she says, right, this wasn't done because I'm afraid of anybody, right? This didn't happen because I'm afraid of any foreign prince. My hands are clean in this. Right? I am not of so base a lineage, nor carry so vile a mind, but as not to disguise most fits most a king, so will I never dissemble my actions, but cause them show even as I meant them. Thus assuring yourself of me that, as I know this was deserved, yet if I had meant it, I would never lay it on others' shoulders. No more will I not damnify myself that thought it not. Now, she is laying this on others' shoulders, right? Ultimately, she has to sign the order of execution. It's up to her whether Mary lives or dies. Mary's her prisoner. She signed the note, she ordered her death. But she really seems to go to great lengths here to put the blame elsewhere, right? Does she seem to be laying the blame anywhere specific?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, because here it says, like, thus assuring yourself of me that I know this was deserved, yet if I had meant that I would never lay it on others' shoulders.
Uh-huh.
No more will I not damnify myself that thought it not. I think she didn't. It's kind of, I think she blamed her, maybe.
Mary herself?
Yes.
Yeah. If anybody, right, it's Mary who drove me to this, right? Now, on the one hand, you know, James and his mother were estranged, right? You know, she had not seen him since he was an infant. So it's not like he would have felt any particular close motherly bond here, right? But at the same time, you know, she is just writing to another king to inform him, right? You know, hey, I had your mother killed, but it's not my fault.
I think this is kind of like, when I was reading it, I was thinking that maybe it's kind of like ceremonial. But at that time it was like, you know, like a thing you should do.
Like a letter of condolence.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
very sorry I beheaded your mom. Yeah, I'd like to see that Hallmark card in the store.
I don't know.
So I think there's a really funny movie made in the 1980s. It stars John Cusack. It's called Better Off Dead. And there's a scene where the main character is, you know, driving his next door neighbor to school, and he says, "Yeah, I'm sorry your mom blew up, Ricky." It's this kind of situation. The other thing is, like, this is all part and parcel of the succession game as well, right? Mary was Elizabeth's closest living relative. So who's her closest living relative now? Yep, James, the recipient of this letter, is now Elizabeth's closest living relative. Now, you know, it's 1587. Elizabeth was born in 1533. She's not producing an heir at this point, right? She will have no biological heir. So James, being her closest living relative, is the guy who is probably going to inherit her kingdom, right? And indeed he will.
How did he react to that? To like this letter?
History doesn't record his response. At least not that I'm aware of. I can't imagine it was a happy or positive reaction necessarily. You know, he didn't know her all that well, but she was still his mother. So early on in Elizabeth's career, we get a lot of her ministers, a lot of her nobles, and the parliaments, right, trying to push her into marriage, right? Get married, produce an heir, secure the succession. But we find in these speeches, right, she is very resistant to being pushed into marriage, right? And in fact, she never does marry. Why, for a reigning queen in this particular, you know, in this particular era in history, might marriage be an unattractive option?
Maybe.
The king, the guy he marries might take over?
Yeah, part of it is about preserving her own power and authority, right?
Because if she married off, the power would go to the king.
Yeah, could very well go to the king, certainly, right?
It's also at a time where it was still pretty new, so if she married someone who's going to become a king, it's kind of a symbol for saying she's weak, she can't do it on her own.
Yeah, that she needs a male figure to prop her up, right? Now, if we look also at how closely, right, this two bodies of the king theme is associated with Elizabeth's rhetoric as well, right? She is England, right? Now, by and large, who do kings and queens marry? Yeah, other kings and queens, right? So chances are she would have to look for a husband from abroad to cement some sort of alliance, right? Otherwise, she would be elevating, some mere English nobleman to the ultimate power in the kingdom, right? And this could also be politically difficult, right? If she elevates one nobleman now over the others. So, avoiding marriage, on the one hand, is a way of avoiding avoiding foreign political entanglements, right? And she always stresses in a lot of these speeches, her extreme Englishness, right? If we look on page 754, right, this 1566 speech, where Parliament has demanded again that she just pick a husband and get married already, right? She says, "Was I not born in the realm? Were my parents born in any foreign country? Is there any cause I should alienate myself from being careful over this country?" Right? She frames it as being in England's interest that she not be forced into marriage. This doesn't. Now, Henry tended to relatively publicly indulge basically all of his appetites, right? His appetites for food, for drink, for sex, for music, for entertainment. Elizabeth cultivated an aura of virginity. This does not necessarily mean that she remained chaste throughout her reign. She never married, but one of the ways in which she played noblemen off of each other was through flirtation, right, and through showing favor to particular noblemen. But like her father, she was also kind of fickle, and people could fall out of favor fairly easily. So I want to look briefly at this verse exchange on page 761 between Elizabeth and Sir Walter Raleigh, who was one of her longest running personal favorites. And can I get a couple of volunteers here? Can I get a Walter Raleigh and an Elizabeth? Let's dramatize this exchange. Can I get a Walter Raleigh? All right, the man who brought tobacco to England. Yes, that'll be you. Thank you, Dakota. And can I get an Elizabeth? Anybody? Come on.
I can do it, but
all right.
my accent is... I can try.
Yeah, go for it. Just, yeah. Okay, Mercedes, you be Elizabeth. All right. So, 761, Raleigh to Elizabeth.
Fortune hath taken away my love, my life's joy, my soul's heaven above. Fortune hath taken thee away, my princess, my lord's joy, and my true fantasy's mistress. Fortune hath taken thee away from me, fortune hath taken all by taking thee. Dead to all joys, only live to woe, so has fortune become my fantasy's foe. In vain my eyes, in vain ye waste your tears, in vain my sights the smoke of my despair. In vain you search the earth and heaven above, in vain you search for fortune keeps my love. Then will I leave my love in fortune's hand, then will I leave my love in worldling's band, and only love the sorrow is due to me, sorrow henceforth that shall my princess be. And only joy that fortune conquers kings, fortune that rules the earth and earthly things, hath taken my love in spite of virtue's might, so blinded God as did never virtue right. With wisdom's eyes had but blind fortune seen, and had my love forever been. But love farewell, though fortune conquer thee, no fortune base, no frail shall alter me.
All right, thank you. And just if we hold on for just a minute. Now, how is he addressing the queen in this poem? What is he addressing her as? Princess, yes. Is this a word that she ever seems to use to describe herself?
No.
Yeah, she doesn't even use the word queen very often to describe herself, right? She's more likely to describe herself in masculine terms as prince or king. So why is he addressing her as princess?
Is it because he wants that poem to come to light? maybe assert dominance or something, the same look, you know, writing this letter, this sweet letter to you,
Mm-hmm.
but yet you're still gonna be, I guess you could say, under me once I get to the throne.
Yeah, he is kind of diminishing her a bit, right? Princess, right? Right, this is a diminutive. You know, basically referring to her as a girl, right? Not as a powerful king, right? We think princess, we think, you know, sparkly gowns and tiaras, right? And she did like sparkly gowns and tiaras, as we see. But she also wielded supreme authority in the nation. And referring to her as princess is a way of kind of undermining or undercutting that authority. Now, Mercedes, if you could then read Elizabeth's response to Raleigh.
Yes. Oh, Signify, wert thou so sore afraid? More not, my what? Nor be thou so dismayed. It passed fickle fortune's power and skill, to force my heart to think thee any ill. No fortune based, though, is that though?
Thou sayest.
Thou sayest,
Mhm.
shall alter thee,
Mm-hmm.
and may so blind a wit so conquer me. No, no, my pug, though fortune were not blind. Assure thyself, she could not rule my mind. Fortune, I know, sometimes doth conquer kings, and rules and reigns on earth and earthly things, but never think fortune can bear the sway.
Mm-hmm.
If virtue watch and will her not obey, ne choose I thee by fickle fortune's reed.
Mm-hmm.
Ne she ne or ne?
Nay.
Ne she shall force me alter with such speed. But if to try this mistress just with thee, pull up thy heart, suppress thy brackish tears.
Mm-hmm.
Torment thee not, but put away thy fears. Death to all joys and living unto woe. Slain quite by her that never gave wise men blow. Revive again and life without all dread. The less afraid, the better thou shalt speak.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what do we notice about the way she addresses Raleigh here? Right? He calls her princess. What does she call him? Pug. Right? What's a pug? Yeah, it's a it's a silly little putty-like dog with tiny legs that sits in your lap and can't breathe on its own, right? So he's okay. I may be a princess, but you, my pug, are a lap dog, right? She calls him pug. She calls him, instead of, Walter or Raleigh or dear sir, right? She calls him, again, by the diminutive nickname form of Walter, Wat. Right, so do you go ahead, keep calling me princess, little puppy dog. We'll see who's really in charge here. So we do see this kind of duel for dominance between these two here. Now, what theme seems to be shared in both poems? What word seems to pop up quite a lot in both? Fortune, yes. And how does fortune seem to operate in Raleigh's side?
Like something that consumes someone. In the way he was saying that it's taken her over to the point where she no longer loves him. It doesn't.
Yeah. And what is fortune? What does fortune mean? What do they seem to mean by fortune?
It can be destiny.
Yeah, destiny.
Like life.
Well, life is maybe a little broad.
Is it something that controls life almost?
Rather situation.
Yeah, Raleigh seems to present himself as being victimized by it, right? So, victimized by chance. Right? I am a victim of circumstance, right?
So she says that it's not going to affect her.
Yeah. So fortune may push you around, my dear pug, right? You may feel like fortune is kicking you in various directions, that you're a victim of it. But fortune, I know, sometimes doth conquer kings, and rules and reigns on earth and earthly things, but never think fortune can bear the sway if virtue watch, and will her not obey. Nay, chose I thee by fickle fortune's reed, nay, shall she force me to alter with such speed, but if to try this mistress jest with thee, right? So fortune might be kicking you around, pushing you around, but it has no effect on me, right? I am not going to be subject to it. So essentially this gives her a chance to assert her power as queen over her subject, right? In this flirtatious little poetic exchange between the queen and a long-standing favorite. So do you guys have any questions about any of these texts or about the Tudors in general? Or yeah, Mercedes.
I don't understand, like, is there any reason why he like makes it like a rhyme and she like just says as a speech? You know what I wanna say? Like he kind of like you can see that it's kind of like a poem.
Yeah, this is a poem. They're both poems.
Yes, but but she's like more, you know, disorganized and is not, you know, as clean as he.
Well, I think what you're getting at is that he organizes his into stanzas.
He says fortune, 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 and then he goes like, in vain my eyes, and he makes like, you know, like it goes as a song, that it says, and she just talks, like with not.
Well, and this, I mean, yeah, she's not just talking. I mean, she is responding also in poetry, right? But she is, you know, I don't
know.
I don't really know how to answer the issue here. You know, the form of each poem is a little bit different. You know, why doesn't she just respond in the same sorts of verses he does?
It seems like he's more so talking through his heart, and she's more talking through her mind. Like, he does really like her, but she's just like, no.
Well, and he keeps using the word fantasy as well, right?
Are you sure that he likes her as much as he's just trying to win her over for something? Because, I mean, it seemed that he puts together this beautiful situation, you know, it's almost romantic, not necessarily a love poem, but something similar. And I think that's where she was getting at, was when Queen Elizabeth responds, she's just like, no, I'm in control here, stop.
Yeah. Well, and this is also part of the way she positions herself politically with her favorites, right? She lets them flirt, and she in fact encourages them to flirt, encourages them to woo her.
So that she can toy with them.
Yeah. And it's not even so much toying with them necessarily. I mean, she is playing a serious diplomatic game that they are also engaged in, right? If she gives too much ground to any of them, then she's living up to the impression that she is but a weak and feeble woman, right? Not someone with the stomach of a king. So she has to encourage them while also reminding them who's in charge, and that she is, for all intents and purposes, the king. And so, I mean, maybe, you know, that's what you're seeing here, is that that's not, well, yeah, what she says is not, I mean, it is poetry. It is a poem, but it's not, she's not speaking in terms quite as flowery or as feeling-ridden. Now, he also, you know, when he uses the word fantasy, in the 16th century sense, what the word fantasy meant was imagination. We still use it to describe sort of like imaginative flights, right? But its strict meaning in the 16th century was your fantasy is your imagination. It doesn't refer to products of that imagination, the imagination itself. So, fortune hath taken away my love, my life's joy, and my soul's heaven above. Fortune hath taken thee away, my princess, my world's joy, and my true fantasy's mistress, right? All of my imagination centers on you, right? You know, I imagined that I was something to you. But now I see you showering favors and letters of patent and lands and other such prizes on Essex, that bastard. What happened to me? What about me? Although referring to her as his, you know, his true fantasy's mistress, also, like, you know, he's kind of bowing on one knee, right? While also trying to undermine her by calling her princess. Other questions you guys have about any of this?
Was it popular for her to make send letters or make poems to other men as well? Because on Monsieur's depart, like it, instead of being specific with who the person is, she just goes on.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Monsieur was a French aristocrat who came very, very close to actually marrying her. Probably closer than most other people. But because England was very, very concerned about maintaining a Protestant identity, and France was a Catholic country that was also sometimes England's enemy, it would have been too politically complicated. Right? It would have caused her probably more trouble than it would have been worth to have married this French prince. Yeah, but poetry is something that we tend to think of as this kind of deep expression of feeling, right? You know, I take my deepest, darkest personal thoughts and desires and I pour them out into verse, and it's, you know, it's honest and it's raw and it's compelling. This is actually a pretty modern idea of what poetry was and what it was supposed to do.
So what was it used for back then? Because was it normal, I guess you could say, for them to just send letters, think about it, I assume, and then make some kind of politically influenced move to kind of play off each other and bat each other around?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of people who would have been writing poetry in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance would have been well-educated aristocrats, right? And it all becomes part of, you know, aristocratic diplomatic games, right? Essentially, the older view of poetry is that it's not an expression of your personal feelings, it's a craft, right? It's a particular set of skills that you learn through practice, right? You learn how to weld rhymes together. You learn how to, you learn how to put a meter together in a poem, right? And you learn how to fit your subjects to that meter and to that rhyming pattern. And when you can do all of those things, then you are a master craftsman. Right? Same thing went for a painter or a sculptor or any sort of artisan, right? You had to learn the conventions of your crafts before you could practice them. Now, it just so happened that poetry was usually not an art practiced by professionals. It was an art practiced by wealthy, literate people, mostly talking to each other. So, yeah, it is really kind of an elaborate verbal game. And it's no surprise that Elizabeth and her father, given the sort of education that they had and the kind of environment they grew up in, were not great, but pretty good poets. So yeah, this is what poetry used to be used for. This is what its primary purpose used to be, how people used to think of it. All right, any other questions about anything at all? Okay, so a lot of this is mostly just sort of going to provide background for you for reading and understanding Edmund Spenser and Christopher Marlowe next week. right? The Tudors are so sort of dominant in the public imagination of this period that without knowing something about them and about their style of rule, Spencer in particular won't make any friggin' sense to you. It may, Spencer is going to be a fairly difficult read anyway, because he writes in deliberately old-fashioned language, right? Language that was old-fashioned even for his own day. So just, take it slowly. If you have questions about anything as you're reading, do feel free to shoot me an email or come to my office. Right? Once the stupid projector starts working, we'll have the reading questions up here, and then that's all I have for you today. Oh, I do have your in-class writings from last week to get back to you as well.